Hey y'all, I'm Atticus, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore and the host for tonight's event. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Gina Apostol and Zamora or Zach Linmark to our at-home Literati series in support of Bibliolepsy. For our attendees, the chat is closed, but I will be dropping the link to purchase Bibliolepsy throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to submit questions at any time. I'll ask a selection of them at the conclusion of the event. And this is just a reminder that you can shop for more books in store or at Literati Bookstore for curbside pickup and shipping to your home anywhere in the United States. And now let me introduce you to tonight's author and moderator. Gina is the author of Insurrecto and the PEN Open Book Award winner of Gun Dealer's Daughter, as well as a two-time winner of the National Book Award in the Philippines for her novels Bibliolepsy and The Revolution According to Raimundo Mata. Our Zamora, or Zach Linmark, the most recent novel of his is The Importance of Being Wild at Heart, and he is currently the writer-in-residence at Phillips Academy in Andover. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Gina and Zach.
Hey, Gina, musta?
Hello, Zach. How are you?
Hanging in there, as in literally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just survived like a 10-hour flight from Honolulu, and then I had to teach my two classes.
Wow.
But I'm still here. I'm still operating on Honolulu time. So
Yeah, that's crazy. Especially, leaving Honolulu. Oh my God.
I know. But hey, got a chance to like reread. I have to tell you, the first time I'm gonna just be a Murray here. The first time I came across your book, Bibliolepsy, was when I was in Manila in 1998, and I went back there. Was there on a Fulbright grant, and I got so excited because it was so. I gravitated to anything nonlinear, and so it's like, oh my God, there's a novel that's like a a puzzle. Like I'm gonna put it together, and I think that's why I became a writer, because my fascination and my love for puzzles, and I started reading it, and I was just so intrigued by the structure. But this was 1997, so like 20 plus years later, I'm reading it on a plane from Honolulu to here. And having lived in the Philippines for several years, it's one of my home bases. What I really appreciate about this novel is not as other than the experimentation that you do with the narrative and the structure, is the family, the family as well as the culture. You were able to capture the mania, the beauty, the sadness, the cultural, the religious, all of these factors, religious, cultural, Filipino factors, in a revolution in 1986, right? So, and you participated in the People Power or EDSA revolution, right? You wanna talk
We
more?
call it rebellion.
Oh, is that what they? Well, okay.
Yeah, okay, whatever. Go ahead. I'm Marxist, so I call it rebellion. So go ahead.
Okay. I don't know. I'm a little on the
Go ahead.
skeptical side. I'm a little like your character here, and I is it a revolution or is it like the longest block party ever?
Yeah, longest block party. Yeah. What was your question, Zach? Sorry, I interrupted.
Oh no, so you participated in the revolution. So can you talk more about that? Like and I'm sure that's what inspired this novel, right?
Actually, I began the novel before the rebellion.
Oh.
So I was still in college. I was just doing stuff in my room, in my dorm, and I just wanted that sense of like, I wanted a novel that would just make me feel buoyant all the time, make me feel like I'd fallen in love with something. And I really love those books that are about kind of joy, like one of my favorite books. I didn't read it then, but it's a kind of book um, that says something about, Too Loud a Solitude by Bohumil Rabal. I love
Oh, yes.
that one about, being in love with books. And of course, it's also in an authoritarian regime, the old Czechoslovakia. But I love books that are about just the love of words, for instance. So that's what I was doing. I was writing a novel about the love of words, but that was 1983, and Ninoy Aquino dies. I still remember when I heard about it, which was from my friend. I talk about it in the introduction to the novel. And then all of these things keep happening. And I was already, involved in the marches and the demonstrations against Marcos before Manila erupted into and started joining our demonstrations. So it was very weird for me as someone who had been joining the marches when no one joined. It was just us. I mean, there were big demonstrations, actually, the student demonstrations I was in, but the ones that happened after Ninoy Aquino died, they were big. I mean, you could tell there was something going on. And so I experienced the state of indeterminacy that the rebellion was. And that, I think, is also in that novel, where at the same time, people were like having parties in the street, but mainly buying peanuts and, just doing all of that stuff. There are all of the signs, there are all of there were almost like Santa Cruzan things going on, Santa Cruzan, those floats. I don't know. And then, of course, it's very religious, both religious and weirdly secular, also Marxist, also
mystical.
A woman, also kind of feminist in the sense that we were believing in the role of the woman, and in the because Cory Aquino was the one who was running for office, so who became the figure after her husband died. So yeah, I was in that. So it started off with just wanting to write about love, a love for words, and then the rebellion gave it a kind of plot.
But there's also another kind of rebellion. I don't know if the word is rebellion, but that you introduce in this novel, which is different way of approaching reading a novel, right? Which I think is, you do this with this book, and then you do it with the novel that you wrote right after this one, The Revolution According to Raimundo Mata, where that you attach reading, not with love of books like you do here, but reading attached to translating, reading as an art of translating, right? But in Bibliolepsy, what I love about this is that, that the character's love craze for books can only begin with this passion for words, right? And interestingly enough, the first words that the character encounter are sexual, like fellatio, and labia, and words that she did not understand but loved. I mean, and I remember that because English is my second language. I don't know, one of those. But that I love the way she loves words, which is the way it rolls out of your mouth, and the rhythm and it becomes like a part of a note for a symphony, which is like how your prose reads, like in Bibliolepsy, right? And so there is that, and then but there's also this reading as a revolutionary act almost, and that you tie it with revolution. There's a sense of empowerment here too that comes with
Right.
Reading. I mean, Sabina Murray in last week's conversation said, there's nothing safe about Gina Apostol, and goes, well, there's nothing safe about her and her books, right? And so I wanted to ask if you could read the opening it's part of your intro, but it's also part of the novel about your revisitation of this novel like 20 plus years later, where you
So
talk about the revolution as I think you liken it to some kind of like an ailment.
do you want me to read it from the introduction or from the book itself?
Oh, it doesn't matter. I think it's the same thing, right?
Yeah, okay, let me just
Yeah.
see where it is. It was at about this time, I believe, that the country became afflicted with what one might call semiosis, a sepsis of the semiotic tract, an infection of the sign-making glands. We assign to this event meanings that all lead to questions of life and death, philosophical heartburn, and patriotic dread. We revise and revisit our feelings toward it, the way Romans of old found omens in the intestines of birds. That too was a form of semiosis. The street itself, Edsa, takes on, at odd moments in the present day when I travel through it, a weirdly disorienting sense of a symbol gone awry. Why should it? It's still just a street going to seed in an unremarkable third world way. Other people, for example, psychoanalysts, romance novelists, air traffic controllers, have pointed out before, in different contexts, that the ability to see meanings is not necessarily a sign of wisdom or health. It may indicate intellectual training or acumen, yes, but it may also be a symptom of delusion, fierce heartache, severe ennui, and other renditions of mental weakness. We must take into account that our own revisions of the rebellion we call, eponymously and thoughtlessly, EDSA, may be all of the above and more. If it is at all possible, in a non-Heraclitean world, to go back, to step into the same river twice. Maybe when we do, we must ban all meanings, tropes, and symbols, the maladies afflicting EDSA. Maybe if we can stem memory within some filtering contraption, a device of a sort for disinfection, by which we can flush out metonyms, similes, ugly, gigantic memorial statues, newspaper editorials, biblical references, mythical allusions, and this entire paragraph, maybe then we might distill something more pure and light, closer to the original weight of a single minute on that street. The problem with epiphanies is that by definition, they cannot be shared. There was no national epiphany in February of 1986. There may have been a million revelations lodged quietly and inarticulately in each heart, which may be a flaw in the message if you wish to see it that way. Is that the part?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Well, that's not very hopeful. I mean, like, well, the character is very skeptic, right? And but that's also part of, I think, the Filipino character, And I think what's so magnetic about your your portrayal of the revolution is that it captured the Filipinos in their most contradictory, the colonial, the cultural contradictions. Not that they that and resigned, almost embracing. They don't have the kind of phobia that some cultures have about contradiction, right? They know that it's inherent in their culture and in their history, right? And so and this malady, right? This, you call it like a sepsis, right? I mean, this is you're working obviously from literary historical timeline with, like, Jose Rizal describing that his period, that revolution, as the social cancer, either the revolution as the antidote as the aggressive remedy to the social cancer, or attached to it, right? And then here you have this one, right? In Bibliolepsy as sepsis, like it's of the blood, right? And then of course, with the current president, there's a different kind of a revolution really waiting to happen. We did have another revolution, and that was text messaging driven revolution.
Oh, are you talking about Estrada?
Estrada, right? And so, with these revolutions, though, you have like I said, all these contradictions at operating simultaneously, right? It's a revolution that genuflects. It's a revolution that has rosary beads attached to military tanks. It's a revolution that with a really flat menu called boiled peanuts and corn. I mean, and I stole that from your book, right? All of this description of the revolution I'm getting from your book. It's a revolution that it's a wrestling match between skepticism and hope, or hopefulness or hopelessness, between superstition and mysticism. All of that is all operating, and so how can you not have, with all of these all boiling in this cauldron called the Philippines? How could you not have a revolution? It's a bubble waiting to burst, really.
Yeah, I do think that part of my own attachment to activism, to the concept that a society can change, that there might be at any moment a possibility that capitalism will fall. Those, like, I still do things to that I think betray that experience that I had during that rebellion, which is that we did go on the streets. We did put our bodies in danger. We did not know what would happen. And that state of indeterminacy that we experienced, like we never knew what was going to happen on the street, and we won. Mm-hmm. And I think that fact that we endangered ourselves, however skeptical I was, about, the leadership, etc., about the Aquino presidency, the possible Aquino presidency.
Well, we didn't know it was going to be them.
I believe that the symbolism of that widow mattered, and it mattered materially. There were material effects of that moment, which was the toppling of a dictatorship. Come on, that is a huge world historical event. That people just going out and buying peanuts and waving their weird, foam finger flags. Of course, there were all of these other geopolitical issues there that's a different piece. But the experience of people on the street produced that toppled a dictator. I think that's a big deal. And I think Filipinos should, just as I think we should keep in mind and be proud of the fact that we were our revolution in 1896 and and our war against America in 1899 were the earliest anti-colonial revolts and revolutions. That one I would call a revolution in Asia. Just as we should be proud of that, we should be proud of what we did in 1986. Whatever it is we might feel about the lack and deficiency and problematic actual lack of a change of the status quo in the Philippines, because we remain a semi-feudal oligarchy. And that is really the problem that I have with calling that a revolution.
In fact, I think it's mentioned in the novel that by toppling Marcos indirectly, you're also putting on the witness stand the United States of America.
Yeah.
You're also putting the spotlight on them, because for the longest time, I mean, he could not be this powerful without the United States.
Oh yeah.
So
Ronald
in a way,
Reagan took him out.
this revolution that takes place almost a century later
Mhm.
is a revolution that, or it's this war against. It's almost like another continuation of the war against the United States via Marcos.
Yeah. And there was, I will say this, even though I say that we remain a semi-feudal oligarchy, and so that that lack of change in that particular aspect, which is really the profound and most it's the thing that we need to keep working at, that political matter, changing this oligarchic system. Even though I say that there was a material change in the Philippines, the move out of the Marcosian ethic, his ethics, which was not ethics, which was about killing, about rampant and horrific disregard for human rights, disregard for norms, democratic norms, etc. That change. There was the fact that we got rid of a dictator, I think we should have executed him. We should have executed Imelda. We should have killed off the family.
Which is what famed Lino Broca, the late Lino Broca, said. We should have killed them. That's what Lino Broca said in
that would have been justice. It would have been a kind of justice for the Philippines. But look, we did not bring justice to those murderers, to those thieves, to those stealers of our own money, the money that money is life, So the Philippine economy that got put into the Marcos machine, we never brought them to justice, and so that's where we are. We did not even bring them to justice in our educational system.
Yes, I agree.
They're not even taught.
Yeah.
And so that's where we are.
I mean, we're dealing with I mean, we're dealing with a megalomaniac.
Not at the Luneta. Maybe what would be the good place to shoot the Marcoses?
No, we can't replay the Jose Rizal. But I mean, like because we're dealing with a megalomaniac here that he was already sick, right, during the revolution. If this guy could run the country from his ICU bed, he would do it. He's just that kind of, and the family, right? And his, cronies, right? And he tried to do it from Honolulu, but couldn't,
It does bring us something to that thing that you were talking about, Filipino culture and ways in which we kind of understand our contradictions. That at the same time that we had this rebellion and we did go out, and then I think it was a true spirit of desire for change in many, many different ways. My novel talks about the varieties of ways that people kind of enter into that revolutionary moment. But also our ability to live with the contradiction of having, let's say, Imelda Marcos still running around the country, like Cory Aquino allowing her to come back. That interesting aspect of the Filipino that has a capacious regard for frailty and ability to take in frailty and live with it. And so on one hand, that's good for an individual. It's not good for a country. It's not good for justice.
Yeah. There's one question here, I think. Can I read it? Oh, so this is from our dear friend Lara Stapleton.
Hey, Lara.
Yeah, because this is related to what I was going to talk about next, what I was going to ask you. Can you talk a bit about the process of building structures for your novel? Do you set out with them in mind or decide upon them in process? What are some of your favorite interestingly structured novels?
Thank you, Lara. I like that question because it made me it stopped me from going to jail. Okay, so the way I think about it is that, for instance, I'll just give Bibliolepsy as an example. I had the voice of Preemie right off the bat. And I think it's because I had her voice and I really enjoyed it. You know, the opening of Preemie is more or less the first paragraphs that I wrote of the novel. Which was bibliolepsy, a mawkishness derived from habitual aloneness and congenital desire. Manifestations, a quickening between the thighs and the points of the breast, a broad aching V when addressed by writers, books, bibliographies, dictionaries, Xerox machines, a sympathy for typists of manuscripts. So that kind of move into like both a weird self-assurance, huge confidence in her ability to define things and make up a word, and two, just like a faith in her own passion and the buoyancy and kind of confidence in just moving into that passion. So I wanted that voice. I wanted to keep that very kind of a voice of agency and a voice of love and desire for this novel. I also wanted the novel to be open and never close, because for me the concept of desire is that we keep wanting something else, and that's for me an aspect of the human, as well as in terms of as an aspect of the human, the reader is the metonym of that human. The reader is a person always looking for the next book that will fill her up. Mm-hmm. So the sense of openness. So now that leads me, that intention that I had, that idea that I had creates the structure, because I had to figure out how to make a book that never ends. So that's where and so there were many different things. That's why actually the book took so long to finish, because it was my first novel also, so I didn't know how to do it. So I had the idea of at the end there would just be a sense of openness to something. Mm-hmm. And it ended up being that final moment in the book where she's talking to Fernando. Can you think of what love went into this? And it's a question mark. So the structure ended up being, how do you make this book open? It ended up being the names of the men created the structure, Domingo, Sábado, Viernes, Jueves. But the book doesn't have a Monday, so the week doesn't end. So there are things that I decided to do with the book, small details that, here's the other thing, Lara, I don't need to tell the reader that that's what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. The reader doesn't need to know ever that there's no Monday in the novel. Mm-hmm. That's not important. But I know, and so I had an idea of how to structure. I don't need to tell the reader what I was doing, obviously, because they're pretty subtle. No one really talks about the fact that there's no Monday in this novel.
Well, interesting, because I saw the structure differently. That there are two sections to the novel, right? And this is where the familial component of the novel, which I think not many talked about, but I think is very rich, because you're talking about the first section is set in the province, in Leyte, right? Leyte as the epicenter of the first part of the novel, and you're talking about the family, right? The parents, the father who's like an animator, and then the mother who's a taxidermist, and then you've got a grandmother there who's like a cougar, right, goes after young men, right? I think I'm,
Yeah,
I don't think I was
I
like,
had a
I don't think, I was like, well, am I making shit
I had
up?
a great
No,
I
no,
had a
she's
great
the
aunt
cougar.
like that. I had a
Right.
great aunt who lost her mind and gave her money to this little 17-year-old boy.
Right,
Anyway.
right. I mean, and then of course they're, then they disappeared during the martial law, the height of martial law. And then the second part, you touch on the narrative then gets passed on to the two daughters,
Mhm.
right? And your protagonist being one of them,
Oh,
orphan daughters, right? And then it migrates to the capital where the revolution is gonna take place, right?
yeah, that's
So
so
that's how I read. That's how I was like, oh, this is like, and then there are all these reflection mirroring going on. How you end the first section with the parents' disappearance, it's like a question mark, which is how you end the novel, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. Um,
You can thank like Hawaiian Airlines. It's like they
yeah,
just
Hawaiian Airlines. Yes, Hawaiian Airlines.
40,000 feet up
Because
there.
it does return at the end of the peanut eating part.
Well, and then
And
the
so
whole
that's so
family.
interesting. So here's what's interesting about that, about how
Okay.
you read that. Fucking is just filler for the family, trauma. Fucking is filler.
Yep.
Whoa, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, it is her, but she needs an outlet, right? I mean, she equates reading with fucking, or reading gives her that high that allows
Reading is
her to
erotic.
live.
Words are
Huh?
erotic. Words are
Yeah,
erotic for preemie.
Of course, because like, look, her first 4 words, right? Fellatio, late. I mean, it's all sexual, right? Erotica, right?
Because they were the books that her parents were hiding.
Yeah, exactly, right?
So
And
they're still related to the parents.
but the
Whoa,
openness of the parents to even allow themselves to explain to her what these words were.
Yeah.
Right?
I have to say, I really like those two, Prospero and Prima. I love Prospero. I wish he had lived more than he did.
Yeah. But you're also talking about you're talking about the sepsis of the revolution. They have their own, right? I mean, they fell in love in the time. Okay, it's not gonna sound like Garcia Marquez here, but it's like they fell in love in the time of TB.
Yeah, tuberculosis.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was rampant, right? I mean, and I was like, oh, loving the time of TB, as opposed to like the revolution attached to sepsis. I mean, so there's all these like intersections coming from these two sections, and I think that I was like, wow, she didn't write 2 books. Like she wrote one. I don't know, like a book that really reflects itself, that's looking at a mirror, which is very Borgesian, which is,
Yeah, I did know that. I actually almost thought, you know how you are when you're a kid and you're writing, it's like,
no, I don't.
yeah, should I go back to the parents? It's corny to go back to the parents, but I did it. I thought that it was a good way to, even though the novel wasn't going to be closed, the psychological issue, I thought, as a writer thinking about the reader, I thought it needed some closure. So that's why there was the circle there, going back to that. And that one of the last person she talks to is Diego Bastardo, her godfather, who I think is also a really nice character. I liked him a lot.
So, I mean, let's get autobiographical here. So, Preemie, okay, so was it the same for you? Was it the love of words that led you to write? Was it?
Yeah, it was really, I think in some ways I love writing, but I really do think that my first act of love was reading. And that reading, I actually really believe in some ways, what Preemie kind of says in the second part, where she says, she tries to write, and then it's just stupid because it's not really her vocation. And her vocation is really reading, and that writing is like this like an apostasy in terms of her vocation, which is reading. And so there's something about it for me where reading is really the primal love. So and that's why I wanted to write about it, because I'm going to be honest, I didn't know why. I couldn't figure out why I liked it so much. Why do I like books so much? So I just kind of wrote about it. And I don't think when you write a novel, I don't think that you articulate the answer, but the process of writing it allows you somehow to work through the question and come to some ways of getting a grip on the mystery that you began with. I don't think that the writing itself articulates the answer. The answer can come, here's the thing again, the answer can come from reading the book.
So what was one of the challenges during the process of reading? I'm just going to say that, reading this novel, right? Because you're writing about reading as much as about, or more about reading than writing, but still, you're still writing about writing. There's a meta aspect. And I think this is the meta aspect in your novels, Gina. I mean, I'll just say it, is what separates you from the bunch of the plethora. Now, the plethora of novels in English in the Philippines that are set in during martial law. And we were discussing this before. These books that are in English that are not published in America for whatever reason, we can come up with 10,000. Like Eric Gamalinda's The Empire of Memory. And
that has some metafiction in it, though.
Oh, that has. But I think, here you have the metafiction sense of, you're talking about writing as is reading, is translating. I mean, you're braiding all of these, right? And what other? And of course, like back in the U.S., martial law books were like Sabina Murray's
Slow Burn,
and Ninoch Carrasco's State of War. Both books are out of print. Of course, Dog Eaters.
Slow Burn has a similarity with Bibliolepsy in that both of the protagonists are kind of clueless.
Okay.
politically
right.
Clueless.
Then of course, Butch the Lisa is killing time in a warm place.
Yeah.
But the meta aspect, I think, is so rich, and it's so right in your both this novel and
all my novels.
I think all, and also Insurrecto, right?
All my novels somehow have writing in them. Like there's a writer and a translator in the novel. Because even in Bibliolepsy, I realized when I was rereading it, there is also her talking to the therapist, and kind of so that you're aware of her telling the story. And so there's her kind of translating in some way to the therapist what this experience of reading was. So.
But you also pay like homage to the books that you like. Most you named, and some I said, "Oh, is this? Is she alluding to Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie?"
Oh yeah,
right.
The nose in the map.
Right, and I was like, "Oh, this is Midnight's Children." Of course, you don't name it. And then there was another one where the writer's writing a novel about a character who then invades the writer and rebels against the writer. And I was like, oh, this is so Felipe Alfao's Locos, Of course, you don't mention it. And that's why I asked you if you had Felipe Alfao in mind. But anyway, so I think we should open it up to questions.
To questions? Yeah. Are there questions?
There's one that's actually perfect, kind of based on that idea from Laura Stapleton. they ask, can you talk a bit about the process of building structures into your novel? And do you set out with them in mind or decide upon them during the process? And then what are some of your favorite interestingly structured novels?
Okay, yeah. I didn't answer the second part. We had talked about the first part of that question. I didn't answer the second part. Off the top of my head, I'd go with, okay, this is really going to be annoying, but I love Proust. I love those seven Proust. I love
I can see Proust in your
yeah,
language.
I love Proust. I hadn't read him when I was reading Bibliolepsy, but that very, 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 very long story, which ends up really being about time.
Mhm.
Oh, I just, it's just crazy. And I read it over time. I read Proust over years, and I still, so that use of time, because he also did it, he published at different points. It's about time, but it also uses time in this amazing way where he's just talking about a couple about to kiss, and it goes on for like 45 pages. And you because there's a lot of shit in between. I don't know. I like that, and obviously it's annoying.
Okay, I love kissing, but I don't know about 45 minutes. I don't know.
I know. Another one that I really love is George Perec. It's called Life, a User's Manual. And Eric Gamalinda and I have talked about this. He said, I started George Perec. I started Life, a User's Manual. Gina, I cannot do it. It's like, because we always talk about Proust, but Perec he wasn't into. I love Perec's Life, a User's Manual. Again, a very, very big book. Not as big as Proust, but it's it's an apartment building, and there are all of these like fragments of a story that eventually, anyway, so it's a very, very braided in a very fascinating and really convoluted way. And I love just being I don't understand what happened to these people and how they're connected, but I love being lost in Life, a User's Manual. So
I call it a loser's manual.
Life, a user.
Look, if you're gonna spend 3 pages like listing down the things in your room, like I'm sorry at that time. I am not taking inventory of every fucking thing in this
That's his novel Things. That's not Life, a User's Manual.
Yeah.
That's a different novel.
But you also you do Rabelais. But Gina, I also have to say you do make a shout out to Filipino writers here.
Oh yeah.
But for the Lovers, Wilfredo Naledo.
Every single novel that I've written does a shout out practically to Noliedo.
What is that? Who is Wilfredo Noliedo?
Wilfredo Noliedo, I don't know much about his life because this is one thing that I really don't do as much. I don't really do a lot of reading about
bio criticism.
Yeah, but I don't do a lot of bio. So my understanding about But for the Lovers is that he grew up in the Philippines, went to Iowa, and wrote this novel called But for the Lovers, which is the title is from a Dylan Thomas poem, In My Craft or Sullen Art. You know that poem, In My Craft or Sullen Art? Yeah. So, and it's about the Japanese period of the Philippines, which is a period I actually hate. I hate the Second World War. I think the Second World War really fucked us over in terms of thinking about America, because it became this cover for America to think of itself as the savior and allowed the Filipinos to really forget the American occupation from 1899 to 1946. So because of the so-called savior aspect of the American story, the fake savior aspect of the American story, we completely forgot, what, or we become blind to what America actually had done to the country, which was a hugely opportunistic imperial land grab and power grab. So, but he does a beautiful job with the Japanese War, because everyone, the American pilot, the Filipino clown guy who's Spanishy, of course the Filipino woman Alma, all of these characters, the young robber, the Manileño robber boy, the Japanese generals, etc., who are like haunted by ghosts, as the Japanese are. He puts them all together in this beautiful a story that's really, if you think about the novel, is concentrated in a very, very short span of time. It's the days before the Americans arrive to take Manila, the Battle of Manila. So a few days before the Battle of Manila, the arrival of the Americans, and then they put Intramuros into rubble. Intramuros never is rebuilt from what the Americans had done to their allied city. But the empathy and grace and absolute love for words that is in But for the Lovers, and no one, Robert Coover wrote the intro to
Has Wilfredo written any books after But for the Lovers?
I don't know. I haven't read those. There's a book of short stories that he has called Cadena de Amor. But I haven't read that. I reread But for the Lovers. I just reread it.
I think it was published by Dalkey Archive.
Yeah, it was first published by Dutton in 1970, and then Dalkey Archive revived it in the 90s, I think.
Okay.
And I think I read the Dalkey Archive edition that no, there was an edition. There was the Dutton edition that was in the library, I think. It must have been in the library at the UP. And then I got a copy of the Dalkey Archive when I was in the States. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, what else? Okay.
We got a question from Deirdre.
Deirdre.
I'm loving this conversation and your reflections, Gina, on reading being the first love prompts me to ask you, who would you say you write for? And has this reader, your reader, changed over the course of your career across the different novels? The following part of this conversation about the meta themes of writing, translating, etc., also begs this question.
Yeah, thank you so much, Deirdre. I would say when I began writing, especially I'm thinking about Bibliolepsy, I was thinking, and I think it was that character that I created. I imagined my young self and how I was so filled, like almost like you're a puppet, like you're a marionette that came alive because you read a book. And that to me is like, it's such a seminal, so that is a masculinist word, seminal, but so that was let's say a clitoral experience. That it does actually link for me recognition of my body, an early recognition of the body and the feelings that a body might have. And that it's connected to the pleasure of words. And so I think early on, the reader would have been that early reader who has a weird, indiscriminate sense of an ability to love. And you just feed that reader with the kind of book that would make a reader love it. And later on, I do think that I began to be very aware. It was extremely so with Insurrecto. I began to be aware of the book itself as producing readers. The book produces readers. And so even in Insurrecto, I would always think about if I have this character, if I have this scene, what are the different ways that a variety of readers would read it? How would a Filipino read it? How would a Filipino American read it? How would a white American read it? How would a Black American, all of these. So I began to think about the fact that a book will produce its reader. And in fact, a book will produce a variety of readers. And so that became also for me very interesting in terms of creating art. Because if I created a scene, I would think, and I would reread it, I would think, oh, this could be read this way, that could be read that way. And one of the reasons why I revised Raimundo Mata, for instance, Raimundo Mata is complete. The current Raimundo Mata is just very revised, is that I had already done Insurrecto. And I had understood that I had kind of, in Raimundo Mata, recognized multiple readers, but they were part of the plot. They were actually very visible, and not just visible, they were very vocal. They were very oral readers. The three readers in the footnotes, Magsalin, Estrella Espejo, and Dr. Diwata Dre. So having done Insurrecto, when I reread Raimundo Mata to republish in the States, I was very aware of the variety of readers. And so I just moved into that space and really had a lot of fun with thinking about the Filipino American who's going to read it, the Filipino who's going to read it, and so on and so forth. So I would say that I'm still very much attached to the concept that the text is at the center, but the reader is part of the text. So I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it's the same. There's another question. Did you have an audience in mind? I think that's when
Oh,
writing.
an audience. Okay, that's different. An audience is different from a reader. An
Okay.
audience is different from the reader in the text. The reader in the text is part of the text. You're writing things, you're revising because you're thinking, oh, that in order for the reader to get something, so there's this reader in the text you're thinking about. If I'm right about the question about audience, I will say there's something else about the question of audience that maybe is in that question, and it's the commercial world, the commerce of the book. And so thinking about who would buy it, is it sellable? Even in the American context, and I find this somewhat kind of weird, the concept that a white reader is part of it. And that kind of thing, I'm going to be honest, and I'm very sorry to my agent for saying this, I really don't care. The commercial world is not my world. That's why I have an agent, because that's my agent's world. That's good for an agent to think about. It's good for a publisher to think about. But my interest is really the integrity of an idea, of a text, and in relation to the reader that text might produce. Because I think if you go with commercial audience, what's the point of writing a book if you're going to think about the market rather than the ways in which a book might move the human being that you wish that might be reading the text. And I think for me, the market audience just it gives me no charge. It doesn't give me an erotic charge. Commerce. I find no eroticism in that concept of audience. And that does not make me right.
That's great, like a difference between audience and reader. And
I will say this, that the writers, let's say like Kafka, who never had a so-called audience, they make their work, the integrity of the work. And I think Kafka is highly erotic, highly attuned to the body, highly
funny.
attuned to the physical. And the integrity of the work moves it into this other space. So Max Brod could not burn Kafka's work.
Well, so on the note of commerce and eroticism, I think that's the top of the hour. Just gonna say thanks to everybody who attended tonight.
Yeah.
And thank you. It's been an honor, Gina and Zach. Thank you so much for spending this time here. And
Thank you so
everybody.
much, Atticus. Thank you so much, Literati. We really appreciate
Yes.
independent bookstores.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
still buy from Literati. So yeah.
Woo! Everybody here should. Yeah,
Yeah.
go on the website and buy Bibliolepsy right now.
Yes. Fill your erotic body.
Heck yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
Well,
Bye.
thanks, y'all.
Congratulations, Gina. Congratulations.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks so much.